So quantum tech is one of potential many solutions in that space. And this is why, again, the government's identifying it as a strategic resource, because it can solve these other problems, in the healthcare sector as well. So it's not just really important, it's really important because it can solve other critical national infrastructure problems and security issues as well.
Quantum technology is the wave that's breaking upon the shore. We're seeing new startups, we're seeing a very substantial amount of investment, and we're seeing new technological advances almost every week. In this podcast, we'll be looking at the question of quantum startups, the issues which are facing them, the challenges and the technology. This is the first of 3 podcasts that we, CMS, are doing with the Office for Investment, looking at the quantum sector. In this one, there will be about general startups, then we'll look about quantum startups relating to financial services, and then we will look at the quantum startups and life sciences. Today, I am joined by a stellar panel. We have Chris Phillips, who is a professor of physics at Imperial College and is part of a quantum hub. We have Joe Spencer from GQI, who are a quantum market intelligence consultancy. We have Gerald Mullally of OQC, a leading quantum computing startup. And we have John Finnemore, who is a corporate partner at CMS, specialising in startups in the tech sector. What I wanted to do, bravely, is to start with Chris to explain what are the fundamentals of this area. What are the fundamentals of quantum mechanics and what this whole technology is based?
Well, quantum mechanics is the science of what happens when things are very, very small. And at this level, everything comes in lumps. When you look closely, matter comes in atoms, light comes in photons, electricity comes in electrons. Everything's lumps, or quanta. And we use those to our advantage. At the moment for computing, which I think is where a lot of the investment is, in an ordinary computer, we don't use those lumps. We use classical bits that can be a 1 or a 0, and we have huge numbers of them. There's 2 trillion ordinary bits in here. But they're very limited because they can only be a 1 or a 0. The idea is that if you get down to the quantum level, you can make a quantum bit, a qubit, which can be in a superposition. It can be 1 and 0 at the same time. And the dream, and there are people theorizing about this, is that if you get enough of these together, they will do things that ordinary computers are just completely incapable of doing. The investment interest seems to settle on security, mostly. People are imagining a day when a quantum computer would be strong enough to break all the codes on which our financial system relies. Some people say, well, actually, if that happens, they call it Q-Day, it won't be such a disaster because actually the encryption codes that we use can easily be extended just ad infinitum, and they'll be able to run ahead of what any quantum computer could do. Myself, I use these quantum ideas for healthcare. I take a photon, I split it into 2, and when I do something to one of the photons, the other one instantaneously senses it, and that's something called entanglement. And my view, actually, is that people might be missing a trick, that there's lower-hanging fruit before the computers come, where we can use these sensing ideas, and there are a lot of them, to revolutionise technology and to make a lot of money for somebody. And this is all part of the government's roadmap, actually. We are written into the roadmap for this. So it's not just about security. Q-Day is a big thing. My own feeling is that this ordinary security probably will run ahead of it. I think crypto might stutter. Crypto's a bit like the fairies in Peter Pan novels. It's only there when people believe in it. And if if people stop believing in the ultimate security, then I think it might just vanish, actually. So that's my take.
Yeah, I mean, quantum mechanics is sort of that as human beings, we only see a glimpse of the real world at a certain level of scale. And if you take things to the extreme, very strange things happen. And there are particular quantum effects like superposition, like uncertainty, which are very strange indeed, but can be highly utilized. Joe, I mean, you're very expert in this area. What sort of technologies are we seeing emerging based on these quantum effects?
Well, all sorts. I think if we sort of go back in a little bit of history again, so, quantum mechanics, or the formations of quantum mechanics, has been around for over 100 years now, since the times of sort of Dirac and Einstein. And we're now on what we call perhaps the second wave of a quantum revolution. So this sort of first sort of formulation stage of the mathematics and the principles of quantum mechanics was 100 years ago, and then in around this 50s, 60s, 70s, we had the advent of the transistor and the laser system as well. These technologies really enabled things like the telco sector, the telecom sector, and that was what, they are exploiting fundamental quantum effects. We're now in this second wave where we're exploiting fundamental principles of superposition and entanglement to generate new technologies. So we've spoke about quantum computers and quantum security. We have near-term opportunities for timekeeping and sensing. But remember, some of these technologies, again, have been around for a long time. We've had atomic clocks for the better part of 50 or 60 years. But we're now improving these atomic clocks, making them better, improving the timekeeping abilities, etc. of them. So we are I think you said at the start, on this wave, we're on the precipice of this wave that we can start to surf to really gain some interesting commercial use cases for quantum computing in the healthcare sector, the finance sector, quantum sensing in the defense and security sector, and the financial sector as well, in the energy sector and the healthcare sector, and quantum communications to enable things like this sort of secure encryption. But I think the fundamental tenet of this is actually, whilst we often think that these sensing, computing, and comms are their own separate pillars, they are all underpinned by an enabling technology layer that do interact with one another. Light sources, single photon sources, superconducting single photon detectors, a thing called SPADs. There's a whole plethora of technologies that enable quantum. So it's developing those, utilizing those, and exploiting those for the particular use case and application that we're interested in, and building up this sort of startup ecosystem that can start to then explore what use cases for quantum may have and start to gain commercial advantage on that.
And what are those emerging quantum technologies that you're particularly excited by?
Well, I have personal interests in development of lower SWaP-C, smaller laser systems that can enable better control of quantum systems. It's hard to we use lasers to literally control atoms at an individual kind of scale, so quite difficult. So you need advanced laser systems with multiple sort of wavelengths or colors and in smaller form factor. I think that's a very interesting area to explore in the photonics domain. I think there's other interesting areas in terms of materials processing and how we go and get things like again, I don't want to use too many technical words, but isotropically pure silicon and other elements that come into the supply chain. Quantum isn't easy. It requires rare elements, strong coherence times, stuff that literally if you look at it, it falls apart. And there's a lot of engineering challenges involved within that. But I think as we develop new technologies, advanced cryogenics, vacuum systems, photonics, and laser systems, that's going to make developing like larger scale, fault tolerant quantum computers much easier.
I hope to come back to the very interesting emerging ecosystem of all these different technologies come together in different companies. But Gerald, you are a quantum startup. You've just raised $350 million on the New York Stock Exchange. You're a quantum computing company. Do you want to explain a little bit of what your technology is?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll build on something that Chris was mentioning and just touch on some of the applications, and then we'll talk through the computing side in a bit more detail. So Chris was mentioning about having more qubits, or qubits being a kind of a fundamental element of quantum computing. We need effectively more of them, but they need to be at a really good quality. And that's our big challenge. The error correction side is the big challenge for quantum computing. But if you imagine, then you've got effectively scale on one axis and you've got quality on another axis, you can now pretty precisely plot out the algorithms that are going to give you advantage over classical compute. And they take effectively a number of quantum operations, which is then a number of qubits at a certain level of quality. The UK government framework is thousands, millions, billions, and trillions. And that's a lovely way to kind of explain the evolution of the market over the next few years. So when you get asked the question, when will quantum provide me with value? it sort of depends where your application, your algorithm sits along that framework. So today we're in thousands of quantum operations before error takes over. That's where the quantum computers are today. And error taking over is like a blue screen event, if you remember, on the laptops of old. And really, to think about it, you've got algorithms, they need a certain number of steps to run them into production. So if you have an algorithm that takes 1,000,000 steps, but your quantum computer can only run 1,000 steps before error takes over, you can't run that algorithm into production. But there are some really good algorithms already out there that we then know, if we're able to build a quantum computer that can run millions of quantum operations, we'll be able to run that algorithm into production and give customers value. So a really nice example is in fraud detection. So there's an algorithm that gives a 15% increase on the detection of fraud over the best classical alternatives, but it needs a system that can run millions of quantum operations before error takes over. We deliver that in 2028 through OQC Titan, which is our next generation system. The early stage applications are in anomaly detection. That's kind of what underpins fraud detection and threat detection. So really, financial services and security and defense are some of the first sectors that experience value from quantum. As you go into billions of quantum operations, more financial services, just on the edge between billions and trillions, you break encryption. And that's the kind of big national security use case. As you head into trillions of quantum operations, it's really all about the archetypal use cases of quantum. It's materials discovery, it's battery simulations, and its drug discovery, being able to take effectively quantum systems and modeling them really precisely so that you can effectively design a better drug, build a better battery, or develop materials that have never been developed before. So really, over the next kind of 3 to 10 years, you unlock this evolving landscape of value. And that's what investors are now investing in, is that prospect.
And the thing that always struck me in this area is there's nothing futuristic about quantum computing. We have quantum computers. You build them. They exist. It's just a question of the parameters, the operational parameters. And it's just a question of getting them over certain thresholds that they then unlock particular commercial use cases. As I understand it, and although people phrase these in different ways, two of the very important parameters are number of qubits and the error rate, typically there. But there's a difference between logical qubits and physical qubits. You want to explain the difference there? And what should our listeners be looking out for in terms of the parameters so they can assess the technology as it's developing?
Yeah, and maybe the simplest way of kind of understanding it just visually is just imagine a wafer, and it could be 100, 200, or 300 millimeter into the future. We can print relatively easily physical qubits onto that wafer. So the number of physical qubits that you can have on a wafer, it can be used as a marker of success. But I think the market is becoming more sophisticated, and investors are kind of seeing that actually just having 1,000 or 10,000 physical qubits is going to be quite meaningless because of the error rates or how good it is at actually being able to run something that's productive or useful. Logical qubits is then you can take a number of those physical qubits and effectively encode a logical or an error detected and in time an error corrected qubit from those physical qubits. And that then becomes useful for computation. And you need as many of those error corrected logical qubits as possible. That's the scale point at a high level of quality. So I think couple of metrics to keep in mind, particularly for the investors out there or for customers that are assessing different providers and vendors. What is the ratio between physical and logical? Because ultimately you'll get a sense on whether this company can scale. If it's a really inefficient ratio, so in other words 100 or 1,000 to 1, how are you going to get the number of logical qubits that you need from that single wafer? And if you can't, is it then a football field size wafer? Are you then having actually to stop that and not become a football field size wafer? Are you constraining the size of your wafer and then networking quantum computers together in order to reach scale? And then you're dependent on quantum networking, which is a whole area of quantum in and of itself, which becomes a risk. So it's a really good one is the ratio between physical and logical qubits.
It sounds like you've gone to all the trouble of making a number of qubits and then some of them become unoperational. That seems the real waste. So you need to have that.
It's the Schrodinger's cat problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, that if the qubit comes into contact with anything, it's a bit like this Schrodinger's cat conundrum. You can make a cat that's half live and half dead in a box, in principle, but as soon as you look at it, it becomes either dead or alive. And the challenge with qubits is to stop them interacting with something while they're doing their calculation. And that is the main technical challenge, is to keep them separate from the rest of the universe while they're doing the job you've made them to do.
But it's not unprecedented, right? In the history of classical computing, we had errors, in the early days as well, and we implemented error correction techniques. Some of those error correction techniques are actually, quantum error correction techniques have been inspired by some of the classical error correction rates or error correction codes. But we've got new ones as well. And I think, as Gerald said, your sort of simple two-dimensional graph is quite useful and intuitive. But the thing that investors in quantum also need to be aware of, you're talking about the algorithms that you implement. You can kind of take a snapshot in time of, if I want to implement this type of algorithm for this use case, I'm going to need a computer of this particular scale, 1,000, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000, or whatever it might be. But over time, these algorithm scientists or mathematicians, they can implement those algorithms more efficiently. So think of it as almost like JPEG compression or something like that. If they can, on that use case or algorithmic domain, implement an algorithm more efficiently, they might then turn around and say, I don't need a million quantum operations. I actually need 1,000. And we've started to see this in the domain as well, that whether you call it a Q-day or the usefulness of these quantum computers, these snapshots in time of what use case I can implement and what algorithm on your two-dimensional graph actually changes through time as other people in the error correction layer, the algorithm layer, start to almost make the job easier for the quantum computer.
I think there you get a sense of what the most quantum advanced customers are doing. Because we get asked all the time, okay, your quantum computer is too error prone. You can't run stuff today into production. Why are customers bothering with quantum today? But they're doing the most advanced are doing exactly what you said. Imagine on that kind of 2D graph again, you're in the billions of quantum operations. You've got derivative pricing. You're one of the major banks globally. If you've got a quantum advanced team with algorithm specialists in it, you can try and drive that derivative pricing algorithm from billions to millions. And if you're able to do that, you can then run it on a much less powerful quantum computer much sooner. And that gives you potentially years of advantage over your competitors who are not investing into quantum capability internally today.
I mean, that's the astonishing thing about this era, is all these compounding advances. But it's advancing as much by the mathematicians with a sheet of paper coming up with new algorithms as it is by the engineers on the front line making extraordinary breakthroughs. But I think there have been at least 3 major mathematical papers this year on advances on the algorithms, and that's happening all the time. And it's just mean the technology is advancing by leaps and bounds. John, rather more prosaically, so people like Gerald have got fantastic technology, fantastic businesses, but they need to take it to market. How do you go from just a brilliant technological breakthrough to actually having a market available product?
It's a long road, I think. I mean, we can all agree that what a lot of our clients have done is to spin that technology out of a university. So we've seen a lot of university spin-outs deriving that. And we've seen venture capital do what venture capital's been doing since the 1940s, which is to fund and develop businesses that are looking to come to market. We've seen 2 quantum businesses, one in hardware, one in software, grow exponentially in that period and raise hundreds and hundreds of millions to try and get something to market and address that. But ultimately, I think a lot of the venture investors still stand back and say, are we here? Is this ready for deployment? Am I going to see a return in the lifetime of this fund? You have to remember that funds often only have a 10-year lifespan, and in order to make a quantum investment, they have to be either very early in that fund and confident of deployment and return in that period, or know how they're going to get out of that investment in the period. So there is a little bit of that. There's clearly been great success that people have raised money and gone on to public markets, but it's still a nascent market and it's still a difficult road.
And Joe, what's your view of the investment view of the quantum world at the moment?
Well, I think exactly what you've said. There are some, I would say, sort of early bullish investors that can see sort of the real commercial viability of it, and there are some end users that are really sort of positioning themselves to have dedicated quantum teams. I know quite a few companies and end users and industry leaders that work in quantum, and it starts as maybe a few physicists heard about quantum and they're interested in it, but it's only when they start to convince their board that there is a real real value here that then they can pick early stage partners to work with. So I don't think it's necessarily just about the investment as well. I think it's about the end user community forming those early partnerships with the suppliers, the manufacturers. So it's not always just about capital. It's actually providing reasonable routes to market as well.
And Gerald, you're sitting pretty. You've just had a massive
money.
investment in its way, but obviously that's only been after quite a period of development. What was your engagement with rounds of funding? Where did you get your money from? How difficult was that?
Yeah, so we've just raised our Series C, so we're still a private business, and we're delighted to have raised $350 million. The round was led by Bullhound Capital, which is a really great British or London-based VC. I think for us, the kind of key reasoning on why it came together, and it was a tough road, as every fundraise is. I think one, I have to say we've gotten really strong support from British Business Bank, and I think that is very helpful because quantum is so related to the national security implications.
The UK is a leader.
Yeah,
the UK is a technological leader along with the US, but we are we're in the vanguard. We're the nation. It's had very strong support in the universities, and that's fed through to government support, lots of good music, and lots of big investment.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think that the starting point is very much the universities and the programs that were set up more than 10 years ago to support the growth of the ecosystem. I think the question in the ecosystem is, can it move from startup to scale up? In other words, can it access the scale up capital that's required? Yeah. I think we're delighted with the support that we've received from the British Business Bank, and I think that really helps when, let's say, a US investor or European investor or an Asian investor sees the direct support that we've had from our sovereign, and that's directly backing us. It gives them confidence in terms of the scalability of a technology that is so closely linked to defence, national security, and to governments. We also have, there's one side where I'm very pleased about is that our customers are beginning to invest into OQC. So MasterCard have now invested into OQC, and that's a customer of ours that we've worked very heavily on fraud detection, actually the use case that I mentioned. But the next step for the ecosystem is how can we activate the pension funds from a UK point of view so that that kind of really large scale capital is more freely available for the growth funds and then ultimately the high growth potential companies such as OQC.
I think that's right. I think British venture capital would say, please do that, not only in relation to quantum, but also more widely than that. I think the other side of that particular element is that going from startup to scale up always takes a very long time. If you look back to fintech disruption in 2010 and you look back to AI disruption, it actually takes a lot longer than you really think it should. But in relation to quantum, I would say we need to get on with it. There's an opportunity here. Let's embrace that and do that, not have a 3, 4, 5 year hiatus where everyone thinks that's a great thing. I wonder when I'll be able to invest in it. Well, now is the answer.
And it'll be return better for pensioners.
Yes.
It does. Yes. Look at the Canadians, the Australians, who free up a huge amount of capital, pension funds, money for investment into these types of sectors. They get better returns.
You talked about MasterCard as one of your customers in investing in you. Is there something very particular about your relationships with customers? Because you don't necessarily have off-the-shelf ready products for them. These are kind of medium-term relationships, aren't they? Is that something you're looking to curate?
Yeah, it's really important, and I think it's there's loads of different models in the quantum computing industry, but I do think having a very close relationship with your customers is almost fundamental. And what I mean by that is that these problems are really hard. It's not the case that you can just cherry pick an algorithm, run it on a quantum computer and suddenly deliver a result. There will be something that is specific and needs to be tailored. We've talked about the need to advance those algorithms in addition, and that's what companies that are more quantum advanced are doing. But for us, the relationship directly with a small group of customers to build the types of products that they want, that's really helpful for us, right? We cannot design or build in a vacuum or siloed from what the market is going to need. We need that, the requirements, the information. Importantly, you can build great technology, but it still needs to be adopted. And it needs to be on that basis. Is it in the data center? Is it accessible by customers within their own IT security constraints? And then a really important one, we talked about the quantum advanced customers. What if you're not? What if you don't have a group of quantum algorithm specialists? What do you do on that basis? Is it then not possible because who's going to program the quantum computer? And this is what's developing, and we're delighted to be kind of leading in this area, is building agentic front ends where a non-quantum expert data scientist, in other words, just your typical data scientist, can just ask the agent, is there fraud in my data set? And it will execute on our quantum computer. In other words, the future is not just about building great technology, it's thinking really hard about its accessibility in the data center and then its usability by effectively with the AI that's emerging.
I think that's a really key point, actually, because it's potentially so transformative. I think it's quite likely that none of us at this table know what it will actually be used for to best effect. And as you're designing your system, you really want to be doing it in partnership with an end user who can, together, this is what happened with us. I was working with cancer detection people. They had a problem, and because I was aware of that problem, I was able to design a machine that would solve it. But that synergy wouldn't have happened, actually, if we hadn't been talking with them. And that's only a very small case, actually, compared with what we're talking about, I think. But I think the general issue is that at the moment, when I go to conferences and I hear people talking about quantum computing, they talk about these technical error corrections protocols and algorithms, but you don't hear many people saying, this is what I would do with one of these wonderful machines.
But presumably, Joe, there's a danger that companies will get left behind in this. In a sense, this all sounds nice to have, but actually it sounds... you may well get to the point where you need to have. Quantum provides solutions, but also risks that really need to be addressed. Do you think that companies can just let it go by, or do you think they really need to engage in this area?
I mean, you can always buy off the shelf at the end of the day. It'll be just an extra cost to understanding what those implementation pathways, so you won't gain the advantage that those early investors and early players and early collaborators would. I will answer your question, but I will just touch upon a point that you both kind of hinted at as well, which is not only engaging with commercial users early on, but also the government users as well. So the UK government has done really well over the last few years on these sort of defining commercialization pathways for quantum, where we've transitioned from the previous 10, when the program was first created in 2014, from research programs of effectively sort of handing out monies to some professors and academics to sort of put a box together and then deploy the box and grow the box.
You wouldn't want that, Chris, would you?
Terrible idea.
But recently with things like Procure, we've started to see signals from government acting as a customer, which is a really good signal for institutional investors as well, to sort of say, well, at least there is one customer and it's going to be government, and then there's those corporate ones as well. But working not only with the commercial users, but the government ones and in things like sensing and defense and security, for defining requirements. Not in the computing domain, are you going to buy a quantum computer? Is it going to be deployed in a data center? Are you going to have some blind quantum computing algorithms deployed on it remotely? Are you going to go and hire in an intermediary team? There's lots of different operational models, and different computing companies are building to sort of fit one or all of those ones, whether it's going to be a cloud access or deployed systems. And in the defense and security space as well, we're starting to see those kind of early collaborations with where quantum, not only computers, but systems, sensors and stuff will be deployed in the above water, below water, land, air, space domain, to really kind of capture what are the electromagnetic shielding requirements of the box or what are the vibration requirements when you launch it into space or something like that. So,
I mean, we should say that the UK government has identified quantum tech as a absolute priority area.
Absolutely.
They published a mission statement on it very recently.
And putting money behind it. Rachel Reeves has put £2 billion behind it.
There's
an office for quantum dedicated to it. I mean, there's a major...
Remember, quantum tech is almost a solution to a whole sort of area of other problem statements. You talk about things like loss of GNSS or GPS is one on the National Risk Register of the document of all the things that could possibly go wrong with the country, and loss of GNSS is high on there to the tune of £1 billion a day loss to the economy. So quantum tech is one of potential many solutions in that space, and this is why again the government's identifying it as a strategic resource, because it can solve these other problems, in the healthcare sector as well. So it's not just really important, it's really important because it can solve other critical national infrastructure problems and security issues as well.
Yes, I mean, it seems to me the global positioning issue is a really good example of the challenge to government about how joined up it can be.
Yeah.
Because in order to get over the bump in the road about that, there needs to be a requirement from government to build in resilience, for example, to airlines or whatever.
Or energy grid is entirely distributed through GPS timing, so if we lose that, it goes down.
And so at the moment there isn't a requirement to have an alternative to traditional GPS. But if they do that, quantum is the obvious candidate, and that would enormously boost the quantum sector. So can the government be suitably joined up to encourage the quantum sector to meet the resilience issue to do it? And we shall see whether government can be joined up in that way. We're coming to the end now, Gerald, but I just want to talk about restraints in the system, things that you are finding difficult. We talked a little bit about fundraising and the challenges there, but you've obviously been very successful in relation to that. What about your workforce? What about the talent? What kind of people do you need to run a quantum business like that? And are there enough of them?
Yeah, I think we're in quite a privileged position in the UK, and it's principally because of the investment, but also the really great work of the universities to ensure that they have programs that are globally recognised, globally leading, and on that basis you get some of the best talent from around the world first wanting to study in Britain, and then once they come and they've studied, they then look around and see, okay, what businesses could I actually engage with and who could I apply for? So when it comes to quantum talent and quantum engineering talent, right now, and I'm saying that speaking right now, this will change definitely. We're in a great position. We can access the type.
It won't last for long.
Exactly.
You need, I would say there's a defining difference between quantum and all of the other kind of bandwagons that roll. I think one of our physics graduates could leave Imperial College and understand AI in a couple of weeks, or genomics, or these are things that ordinary graduates can get their heads around and be creative with. These quantum tech ideas, I think, are a stage further on. When I gave lectures on my EntangleCam system, I would regularly get hostile questions from an audience that all of whom had physics degrees. And it wasn't until the Nobel Prize got awarded for it 3 years ago that they even believed what we were doing. And I think there's something about the quantum physics behind all of this that really needs PhD level training. And I wouldn't say that about other things. And I think, yes, the government's done a wonderful job at the moment to set up all these quantum hubs in universities, funded them for 10 years. Youngsters are coming through. But if you really want the industry to scale, as you obviously do, you need more. You won't be able to get by on the programs that you have now.
I'd say my hot take is broadly agree, but actually we don't necessarily need just more physics PhDs. I think there's as we get to scale-ups as well, the requirements for engineering and other, software design and other kind of skills, which I don't think we'll always need more PhDs in physics to sort of do research and develop the tech. But I actually think there's almost like a delivery aspect for quantum at the moment, which will require like highly educated, advanced technical staff, technicians, etc. And I think the UK is potentially, with the distributed hubs that we have, the companies that we have all over the country, we're in a pretty good position to start to implement things like national apprenticeship level programs within quantum to bring young people who might be thinking of university or work or wherever they want to go into the quantum ecosystem, not necessarily as a quantum physicist sort of developing a new type of entanglement paradigm, but building out cryostats, maintaining systems, doing the systems engineering and systems thinking to sort of deploy these systems in data centers as well.
And presumably this is very much a global talent pool. These are very specialised skills you're looking at there. Are you recruiting from overseas? There's a special visa program, obviously, for these very highly technically people. Is that how you look at it?
Yeah, absolutely. The top talent is going to come from all around the world. We are in a good position in the UK for that type of talent, but we do look internationally, and then having a visa regime that supports that, I think, is really important. I know the UK government has now launched kind of a global talent scheme, which we're very pleased about, and that kind of ensures that there is very direct support for accessing the type of talent that we require. But I would say I would probably draw it back to what we spoke about before. better capitalized businesses will be able to offer packages that attract top talent. And my sense is in the industry, while the fundamentals we need to ensure there is more talent coming out of those universities to be able to compete, particularly where we see it at the pace of the industry and the growth of the industry internationally, we need to make sure we've got the best capitalized businesses in the UK. And that's my final point, as I would draw back to. That's the key focus.
So everything is about the financing. It always is. That's all we got time for. It just falls to me to thank my panel for what I thought was a very interesting discussion. And I hope that was interesting to people watching. And I hope you will join us for the rest of this series as well. Thank you.